fourth episode in the podcast series where I'm meeting up with friends and asking them what they think helps a school to thrive. And today I'm absolutely delighted to welcome James MacDonald, whom many of you will know, I'm sure. Hi, James. You're the director, the head or principal of the International School of Brussels, but you're called director, I believe. That's right, isn't it?
That's the title here. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, what are you up to at the moment? Are you coming up to half term? What's on your agenda for this week and next week?
Yeah, we have another week here before we have a little bit of a break. But it's been a great start to the school year. We have been on this plot of land here for 70 years at the International School of Brussels, and just recently we announced that we purchased it, which is fantastic because previously it had been leased. And of course, when you have leased land, you don't know whether you can stay on it forever. So yeah, there's been a big celebration here in the community. So yeah, apart from that, we are just plugging away and working our way towards that break in about a week's time.
Okay, great. I'm sure well deserved, I'm sure. If you now own the land, does that mean your sort of your scale of thinking kind of expands? You know, you can think about the next several decades now. Does that sort of change your vision and your perspective, your horizon?
Yeah, completely. What the terms of the lease were, we had 13 years left on our lease. And so over the last decade or so, we've been hesitant to put up any new buildings or major reconstruction because if the lease was to expire, the owners would have taken possession of the buildings. And if you put too much investment into those things, you could drive up your either renegotiation for the lease or the purchase price. So now we can have a really in-depth conversation about our plans for the future, including building development and knowing we're going to be here. It's just fantastic news.
Yeah. I can empathize. I live in a rented house. I just moved in a few months ago and really unsure. I put blinds up and I was fixing some potholes in the drive yesterday. So I'm taking the view that it's like my house. I've just got to go for it and make it as good as I can. So well, look, thank you so much for spending time with me today. Before we talk about what makes a thriving school, and perhaps you can give us some examples from your own school now, could you just tell or remind me, I suppose, and tell everyone else a little bit about your career? I'm trying to avoid the word journey, but your journey as an educator, because it started in Canada, but then I think you were pretty almost straight away out in Japan, right? That's where you sort of cut your teeth and learned your craft.
Yeah, interesting you say journey, and we'll avoid that word. But I started by going to Japan, and then I moved a little bit further in Asia, and then I went to the Middle East, and now in Brussels. So I'm kind of going around the world. So if you drew it on a map, but yes, I was in Japan for a total of 14 years, and I started out as a teacher there. I was teaching IB diploma. I was also the IT director, because in the late 90s, if you could plug in a modem, you were king of the campus. So I was just slightly ahead of a couple of the students, but I started out there.
But you studied business as well, didn't you? You studied
I did.
to be an educator, but you also, I mean, I think you got an MBA as well, didn't you? You're very well qualified on the business side.
Yeah. So along the way, and then I taught business studies as well, which was a lot of fun. And but I was in Yokohama as a teacher. I eventually left there as the head of school. And then I went to a place called NIST International School, New International School of Thailand, which was a three-program IB school. And after that, I went off to work for a relatively large organization in the Middle East called GEMS. And GEMS Education, I was overseeing a group of schools, all the IB and American curriculum schools, including some global parts to the organization. And after that, after 4 years in the Middle East, I then moved here to the International School, Brussels. And this is my fourth year. Yeah,
excellent. Well, I'm sure you've got. Well, I know that you're a deep thinker, and I've read some of your articles and listened to some of the podcasts you do yourself. So I'm really looking forward to hearing your answer to my question that I'm asking all of our guests on this podcast series, which is, what do you think helps a school thrive? And I'm sure there are lots and lots of different ingredients for a thriving school, but what is the one that you'd like to propose, put into our library for this series? What would you say?
Let me give it a bit of a preamble before I come to that one thing. We have a very strong mission here at ISB. And the idea that we are mission driven runs throughout the school. and we're a not-for-profit, and we really do believe in this mission that everyone is included, everyone is challenged, everyone's successful. It's very succinct. It's really around those words. The everyone is an important part of that, but the included, challenged, successful. And for us, it becomes a question of, if this is our mission, how do we go further with the mission? And when I look at that one core ingredient, it might not be the same thing in every context, but depending on where the school is at, what phase of development, I think that answer could change. But for us, it's really been around this one word, which is personalization, which isn't a strategy as much as it's a philosophy. And this idea that the best style of education has always been one in which you can meet the learner where they're at. You can provide the right type of challenge, the right support, and that learners will progress according to whatever the learning objectives would be based upon their own pacing. So they might have their own learning pathway. They might have their own set of differentiation that's happening in the classroom, the different resources. And the more we can do that and meet every student where they're at, the better education we have. And I think for us, when we look at our mission, if we're saying everyone included, everyone challenged, everyone successful, particularly around the challenge, we really have to differentiate. We can't have a one size fits all. And so for us, that key ingredient is that the degree to which we can personalize the education we're providing, that's the secret ingredient. I think it's timeless, but we're at a pretty exciting point too, where we're seeing different technology becoming available, different trends in industry, whatnot, that are leading to increased levels of customization all around us. Schools, we're not quite there yet. Yeah.
No, sure. I mean, does that mean you're doing a lot of testing, a lot of assessment, getting sort of scores and marks, or is that just one tiny part of it, or not even part of it? How do you get to know where the child is at? How do you know at what point you need to meet them?
I think that's the key, is how well do you know your students? How well do you know the children? Of which testing data can be very important, but it's not a full picture. There's also the relationships that you might have. But one thing I think is very important as we're trying to develop as an independent school is getting the right amount of data in front of teachers so that they can know their kids and they can have different perspectives on what's working, what isn't. And so that data is really key, but it's only part of the learning that's happening. There's a lot of things around social emotional learning, for example, that can play into some of the academic results, as we well know. So getting data systems in place, really, really fundamental. But at the same time, when we look at our sort of holistic approach to education, we're not just looking at test results. We're not just looking at academics. We have far greater aspirations for the sort of person we're trying to create here in this environment. And so that doesn't get measured through a test, but it's just as valid in terms of a learning outcome.
Okay. So how was I want to know how the students' life at your school has changed as a consequence of this development, or how it's changing. But can I ask you first about for a teacher? So what does a teacher maybe do now that they might not have done in the past? You know, what in terms of either their routine or their approach in the classroom? Could you give us some like specific examples of a thing that you would expect a teacher to do now who's fully bought into this philosophy, this approach?
Yeah, a big thing we've been working on over the last couple of years is what you mentioned earlier with our data systems and getting a common platform across the school, because that was not in place before, and allowing teachers to have that information that's available and work that into their discussions at team level meetings and whatnot, deciding on how best are we going to strategize around these different learners. Another thing that I think we're quite good at and always have been is that we're a very inclusive school. So unlike many international schools, we have intensive learning support. So these are students that wouldn't normally be accepted at most international schools. And with that comes, and I'm so proud of the expertise we have here on campus, but we have incredible expertise in terms of working with students with learning differences. And so how does that approach play out in some of the more, what you might say, mainstream? Is something we've always tried to incorporate. One thing that we've identified, though, is that because we've been so strong on the inclusion side of things, is that there are some kids that in some systems you might say gifted and talented. We haven't been necessarily challenging them to the extent that is beneficial through sort of that personalized education lens. And that's been a difference over the last couple of years, is more overt focus on some of those more able students and making sure they're getting the right level of challenge. And I think if you were to ask teachers what's changed, it's been some of the stuff around the data systems, and also that notion of how are we challenging all students? How are we making sure everyone has that right level of challenge? From here, when you talk about personalization, it's not one thing. It's many, many different things. It's everything around personal development for the teachers, right? Getting the kids on board.
Yeah.
Another thing that we're doing that I think is pretty interesting, we're just getting ready to launch, is something we're calling Pathways to Excellence. And this is a program that we're setting up for the arts, for the athletics, and also for STEM. And we're going to identify certain students. We're starting with high school, and certain students that want to pursue either athletics, arts, or STEM beyond high school. So maybe they're looking for scholarships in the US, or they're really focused on STEM subjects. And we're creating a comprehensive program where we'll have mentors for them. They will have bespoke timetables. They'll have opportunities outside for expertise. We'll make those connections. And we're seeing that being maybe half a dozen students to start with, but expanding that. And it's kind of that extreme end of personalized approaches. But really saying this is just as much of one of our graduates as anybody doing the main, say IB diploma pathway.
Okay. No, I get that. But you're quite a big school, aren't you? Well, it depends what you compare it with. You're 1,300,
Yes.
1,300 children. I mean, maybe I'm a bit old-fashioned, but I'm thinking that the class size, the number of children that per teacher, is going to be a key determinant of how well the teacher can get to know the student and how personalized the learning can be. I mean, are you having to work in smaller groups with the children, or are you using technology, or how are you getting that really personal connection between the teacher and a student?
One thing I think it's been happening here for many, many years, and certainly before I arrived, was this high level of relationship between the students and the teachers, where our teachers care a great deal, and they really do strive to know their kids very well. But you're right. I mean, one of the challenges with this is if you have 20 kids in your class and you see multiple classes a day, say in the upper school, how well can you know your students? So one thing that we're trying to do with this, as I mentioned, with some of the technology, is allowing for people to be able to pull up information on students, have a few insights on it. But I can see in future some incredible potential, and not just here at ISB, but with developments such as AI. I know we've been talking a lot about it from the point of view of, are those kids actually writing those assignments, or it's something else write it for them? And that's part of the conversation. But there's a far bigger one around, if you want to just put it crudely, as efficiency. And the fact that we have so many, say, language teachers around the world that have historically been taking backpacks home with their papers to mark. And now it's obviously on a laptop. But much of these kind of repetitive tasks are going to be able to be supported by things like AI. And when you look at something like assessment, there's things humans are doing now that we will be able to have technology doing. And if we are able to free up teachers' time in some of these domains, that allows us to spend that time doing other things like meeting with students in small groups and having other ways of connecting with them. And I see that as some huge potential. And we've seen it in industry, right? Car manufacturing 10 years ago, you buy a new car, and it comes out with certain features from the factory. Nowadays, you'd go in on the website and you'd order it, and it'd be customized. This is the direction of travel in society in general. And I think what we're holding back, in your question about the class sizes, again, it's not all about money. We're not for profit, but fundamentally, it's about efficiency. If you have one teacher and 20 kids in a class, right? How do you make that more efficient? How do you individualize the learning without driving up the costs? Because you can't put 3 teachers in that class with 20 kids. You can't afford that. So how do you make that one teacher that much more efficient so they can connect with kids, know kids, individualize strategies, and differentiate? That's the question. And there is real potential with some of the technology.
Yeah, no, I get that. I mean, so for a student, are they? I suppose it depends on how far you've advanced along this. Again, trying to avoid the word again. But how far advanced your developments are. But are students that have been in your school for a few years, will their experience be different today from what it was before? And if so, in what way?
One thing that's I think quite remarkable about ISP is it's been a very good school for many years. I just incidentally, I just got back from the US. We did an alumni tour, and we used to have more Americans than we do now. We are at 18% American and 63 nationalities, so it's less.
Yeah.
But back in the 70s, we had 80% Americans here at the school, and that means we have a massive alumni network. I went to the reunion of the class of 1973, and there were 60 people there. 60 people.
Wow.
In 50 years, they're all 68-year-olds, right? But just love the school and the way they talk about the school and the relationships they had with the teachers and the way in which ISB had such an amazing impact and shaped their lives. So I don't want to say that we've just put something in that suddenly caused this big change. As I mentioned earlier, we're recommitting to our mission with this idea of personalization and trying to go even further with it. But it's something, if we're doing anything with this, it's because we're building on many, many decades of an ethos, of a culture, of an approach to learning, of those relationships between the adults and the students and the students and the students and the adults and how we learn, and trying to get that much better at it. So I don't know if we're looking for transformational change, but we're constantly looking for that adaptive change that is incremental, building on what's good, discarding what isn't working. And this is why personalization fits so well for us. And that's why I'd say it's our thing, but maybe not everywhere. Yeah.
No, I see that. And I think it's a sign. I mean, my background, if you go back far enough, is in marketing of, of consumer goods. And I've always been interested in the topic of brands and brand strategy. And I think a strong brand is one that, definitely evolves and develops with time, but always stays true to its core, which is its mission and what makes it distinctive in the market. And it sounds like that's what you're doing. You're taking what's always been very special, but like adapting it, making sure that it's constantly developing and improving, but remaining true to what the students that you met at the reunion will still remember. Which is great. So, well, James, look, thank you so much for talking about your the personalization of learning at your school, and it's great to see you again. I still haven't come out to see you in Brussels. I keep telling you I'm gonna do that, but I will get there. It's not that far away after all. But I look forward to seeing you again, and thank you again for today. It's been great talking to you.
Thanks for having me.